Welcome to Exhibition. And hello, Peter Sharp.
Hello, Richard. It's lovely to be here on this great day. It's actually sunny outside. It's good.
It's great to see you again. And your exhibition is going somewhere else at Nicholas Thompson Gallery in Melbourne. And we'll get to that intriguing title very shortly. But first of all, I want to go to the very broadest of themes, which really for you over so many years seems to have been your relationship with the environment as part of your practice. How would you describe that relationship?
For me, location, geography and art was a way of me occupying the world and seeing the world. And I've surfed now and been involved in the ocean for probably, it's over 40 years. So I have a lens of landscape, and geography it's kind of my way of seeing the world. And so naturally, when I was drawn to art, I just started using landscape as a way of finding my place, and it's just continued. And what's interesting about that is the style. It's funny, the style has changed. Visiting places like Fowlers Gap and going doing coastal beach runs and things like that, surfing. The landscape stays the same, but the way I see it has changed, and that's kind of interesting. Maybe that's to do with the title as well.
Although you mention landscape, a lot of the focus or the ingredients of many of your exhibitions over the years have actually been life within the landscape. There have been works about whales, there have been works about spiders or based around the geometry of spider webs. There have been many works based around eucalyptus trees. So is it more than the landscape? Is there something about the biology that really fascinates you?
Yeah, and again, it goes back to growing up. I've always been interested in how nature works, and I use the word machinations, how it fits together and the systems that are involved. And I'm also interested in things like entropy, like when something gets to, like when a tree, I'm looking over the top of the camera at the moment at a tree in our backyard, and I worked out this tree's got to be probably 80 to 100 years old. And how things grow, form, get to a point where they reach their peak and then slowly decay and move from life to death. And I'm interested in those kind of systems in the natural world, and then how you actually make work about that, how you paint that wonder. And I don't mean decay is a bad thing. I think it's one of the systems that we use. And so I'm not interested in the big view. I'm interested in other ways of seeing landscape. And that came about from looking at Aboriginal paints too. That was a major thing in the early 90s. So, I was trained in a kind of Western modernist way at university, the university I teach at, Art and Design, School of Art and Design. But Aboriginal painting was such a big thing because it can do both macro and micro at once, and it kind of gets rid of the view. So it's, 2 or 3 ways to answer your question. But little things, can sometimes explain a big thing, if that makes sense. Little views of things.
It does, because one of the most important parts of the way in which you seem to work is the very carefully analytical process that's involved, or very methodical process, where, as you say, you look very closely at natural systems. And once you start to understand the nature of an object, you take it through various iterations. Perhaps I shouldn't explain too much. I'd like you to explain a little about the process that you've developed.
I've tried to come up with an a different way, or my own way of seeing things in nature. So my way of co-opting or using nature is to draw things that are around or in front of me or are there, and not trying to interfere with them too much, but just find something. And so that way of drawing immediately from objects outside then feeds into the paintings, and through a kind of abstracted deconstruction process, it turns into these quite flat, shallow spaced paintings. But for me, they're still about real experiences, and that's really, really important. And it's me also trying to have a conversation with Aboriginal painting as well, because I see that as one of the most authentic real things that's ever come out of the Australian, art world.
So give us a sense with, say, some of the range of the works in this exhibition of how you make the transition from often artefacts or parts of eucalyptus trees or other objects in the environment, how you make the transition to the sort of paintings that we see in this show.
It's a great question, and it's something that I developed over years. So these are linen panels. So like the painting that's up behind you on the wall there, that lovely little yellow painting, they're plywood or MDF panels that I put linen. I enjoy the craft of it. I see myself very much as a craftsman, or it's a trade-like pursuit. So I actually like making or stretching the canvases or these panels. And in this new exhibition, they're about 75 by 60 centimeters, gluing these linen panels down. And then what I do is I literally sample, I was talking about these little drawings, A4 stuck on the wall. I put them all up, and then I use those as a visual prompt, and I take bits and pieces, sometimes a detail, sometimes a simple form, could be a shape or a couple of lines, and then I lay those down in paint on this prepared linen panel. And it gives me something to bounce off, something visually to then layer other imagery over the top. And it's really important that the initial paint marks on the linen panels mightn't look like the object. So in this case, and most of the pictures in this exhibition in Nicholas Thompson are to do with trees and bits and pieces of trees. But it's really important for me to have that line of truth from observation, that analytical thing, because it gives me something to rest meaning on. And then what I'll do after I lay those acrylic shapes down is I'll put a series of washes in oil paint or build up a surface texture. And it's then a call and answer thing with the paintings of trying to come up with a way of evoking or talking about my experience of being in that place or that landscape. But I don't know whether I call them landscape paintings. They're more like they're like still life paintings of bits and pieces about nature.
You mentioned that almost workman-like approach to the creation of the paintings, and the paint surfaces themselves in these works are sensual. They look really different. There are different areas of paint. So as you work, whether it's with a palette knife or a brush or the various other things that you might use, are you conscious of creating those very different surfaces?
My analogy for that would be the natural world itself. There's lots of different surfaces and textures and atmosphere and ambience in the real world. So I want that variety in my pictures as well, especially the Australian landscape. It's scruffy, it can be calm, it can be stormy, weather can change really quickly. And I think the pictures would be less if they didn't have those different surfaces in. So, if you use a palette knife and trail some paint across a surface, it can stand up and look like tree bark, or you can scribe back into that paint texture, or you can put a wash over something. And that all becomes kind of visual analogies for bits and pieces of nature. And I think that's, in some ways, a natural way to make these pictures. And it becomes kind of a clue for the viewer too, because they might then go, oh, that reminds me of, the texture of a eucalypt tree, or, the bark or a leaf, or even sound. It's trying to find the smell or sound in kind of analogies. Like that picture behind you, the reason it's got yellow and it's got those orange in it, it's as much about the look as it is the smell, lemon scented gums and things like that too. So it's me trying to come up with textures, surfaces that parlay into an experience of those objects or places that I'm trying to paint. So I'm kind of looking for other ways of talking about Australia in a landscape experience. But again, I don't know whether I call them landscapes. I'll let other people decide.
Well, let's go to a couple of works specifically. Proposition for a Tree 6 and Proposition for a Tree 7. And so it seems as though you are thinking about how you might propose the idea and the observation and your knowledge of, in this case, a tree.
The drawings were of little seed pods or twigs of eucalypt trees, and they were actually drawn. Sometimes the drawings I refer to can be 2 or 3 years old, and I'll shuffle through them like play cards, and I'll find something in it that I'll put down on a linen board. And then it's trying to make the picture make sense in a formal way. And I use cut out pieces of cardboard. And one of the pictures, I can't remember, it's proposition 6 or 7, there's actually a blue section of cardboard in it. So it's me replacing the sky, not putting it in a horizon way, but putting it over the top of the imagery that's behind it. And it's so me collaging, reframing, deconstructing the way that we see bits and pieces of the tree. And I'd argue that, and this was quite powerful walking through landscape with Indigenous people too, that you see a tree from a distance and you get whole view, you get close up to the tree, you start to see parts of it. Then you get under the tree and you're looking at this dappled light. So there's multiple views and multiple ways of seeing a tree, if not nature and landscape. So what I'm trying to do is do a more deconstructed, different view of it, where it's got bits and pieces of the tree that I put back together. And the reason I called them proposition for a tree, and there's quite a few of them now, is because they, in the end, they don't necessarily look like a tree as we know it. I'm trying to come up with a question for the viewer. Can you relate this to your experience of a tree? And I'd argue, because it's got, personally I'd argue, for me, it does, because of the colour, the texture, and some of the line work in it goes back to those direct drawing experiences of the trees.
Let's go to that exhibition title and theme, the exhibition title, Going Somewhere Else. And in the catalogue essay by Michelle Cawthorne, there is a suggestion that, at least in part, the somewhere else that you go involves some unexpected encounters in ways that you haven't quite previously experienced. Where is the somewhere else that you're going with this exhibition?
Every picture in if you'd said to me, this is a year's work, if you said to me a year ago, all these pictures are unexpected, it's a bit of a fight or a dance. So going somewhere else, they're pictures about nature, but I've never seen them until they make themselves and talk to me about what I'm trying to do. So going somewhere else is, I think, the role of all artists, anyone in creative. And I tell this to students too. If you're making the same picture over and over and over again, and look, I admire people that can do that, but I can't do that to save my life. I'm more interested in making things about things that I necessarily can't explain or haven't done before. And I want, not in a sense of novelty, but in a sense of an original, authentic experience. So it's trying to take the picture somewhere else to make it more real in some ways.
Drawing seems to be of itself a big part of your practice. I recall some years ago, the Art Gallery of New South Wales invited you to show a complete wall of small drawings as part of an exhibition there. How important is the process constantly of drawing for you?
It's the way I see the world. So me making sense of that is to draw it. And look, I'm lucky enough to show in the same gallery as someone like Kevin Connor. And I remember us having conversations about this, because he sort of said, without drawing, the world is nothing. It's a way of constructing the world that you live in and see. And I'd agree with that. And in some ways, it's much more important to draw something, because you slow down. The way that you see things becomes much more truthful than just taking a photograph of it. If I look at those drawings, I go straight back to that experience. And the drawings can be 15 years old, but because I spent the time to be present in that place, the memories all come flooding back. So they're quite powerful things, because you had to slow down and observe and wrestle with the materials and deal with flies and the weather conditions and all that kind of stuff as well. So it's drawing. I'd agree with Kevin Connor. Drawing is everything, really. I couldn't do anything else without it.
You just made reference to wrestling with flies. And I know you spend a lot of time regularly at Fowlers Gap, the arid zone research station there. Are there works in this exhibition that specifically refer to that sort of environment? And why do you like to keep going back to that environment?
Fowlers Gap is like, it's my outdoor laboratory. And it was set up, it's a trip, an elective painting trip that I now run through the art and design school where I teach. But it was set up by Idris Murphy, really well-known landscape painter. But there's a romance to it. You drive 2 days out, and I almost go back to the same set of trees each year to see how they've changed and what I can get out of them. But it's interesting because I've been going out there, and my whole practice comes from that place. Because it's funny, I've got this giant gum tree that I'm looking over the top of you at, but I have to drive, 1,300 kilometres out to Broken Hill to draw trees that in some ways, come from the same genus and same family. But Fowlers Gap's given me a way of seeing the world, because it's like, well, going somewhere else. You spend time to get out there, and you'll trip over things that are familiar, unfamiliar, that I mightn't have seen for a year. And that it gives you time out. It's like decompressing too on the way out. Whereas, when you're in Sydney, you're in the suburbs, you're teaching, you have a studio, whereas it's a different kind of place. And it's not necessarily that it's desert. It could be too, because the landscape's more sparse. So you have to look harder to find things as well. And that's in a way what made me think about making the drawings the way I do, picking up bits and pieces and drawing those. And so, there's a certain romance, but it's also a place that I've spent so much time that it's like a laboratory. I go there and I feel completely at home, and I can kind of do what I want out there, when I want, how I want. And so I've got a real sense of belonging out there as well.
Is part of that visiting and revisiting, whether it's Fowlers Gap or whether it's the beaches and the surf or even the eucalyptus tree in your own backyard, that visiting and revisiting gives a sense of familiarity, but the going somewhere else maybe gives a sense of risk to some extent. Is there a real somewhere else that you could imagine in terms either of approach to painting or location that you have yet to explore and maybe might be next?
That's a great question. I don't know, Richard, until it's sort of, I trip over it, literally. So you talked about the whales or the spiders or eucalypt trees. I have to kind of, and it's not something that I do on purpose. I would love to, really, and I still don't know how to do this. So I mentioned beach. I've spent more than half my life immersed in the ocean, but it has a way of kind of tapping me on the shoulder. I don't kind of ask. It just sort of finds me. So yeah, the going somewhere else. Stay tuned, I think.
Well, it certainly sounds like an adventure to come. But in the meantime, Peter Sharp, thanks for sharing your exhibition with us.
Thanks so much, Richard. It's been fun.